actions on long-term policy issues. As I mentioned in the big session, it's a little different now because of the virus and the equity markets, and so there's also a goal of this mission just to learn from everybody up here and out here where we are and what we think we're really facing. And my working assumption with these groups is that you all know as much as we do on any given topic, so I'm going to look to you for not just questions but points of view, as long as you can keep your points of view concise. When we get about 15 minutes to our close, I think we're starting, 1:30, so about 2:45, we're going to start summarizing what we've learned and where we are, and develop some action steps or some thoughts. My action comes from Winston Churchill, but I'll disclose that towards the end of the meeting. Now I'd like to reintroduce our participants. Steve Moore, you heard did everybody hear Steve in the main session? Pretty much. Yeah. And Mark, you heard from as well, and famous economist. John Slavic, I've asked to join. He's a CNP member who runs a substantial investment management group. It's Slavic 401k, and aims to create a more stable workforce, healthy economy. John, real quick, how big is your operation?
We have 187 employees.
Wow.
Manage 6.2 billion in assets. And we're in Florida, Arizona, Ukraine, and India.
Wow. Are you based out of Florida, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Ukraine part I call Operation Hunter.
But he's not on your board, is he?
No. He's overqualified.
He's overqualified. So why don't we get right into it and pick up where we left off? Obviously, I wanted John to be involved because he's in the real world of deploying capital and has to live with the consequences of his decisions. And of course, the economists do as well. You published guys. So Steve, why don't you pick up where we left off? Take about 6 or 7 minutes to set the stage, and then we'll go to Mark and then to John.
Sure. Well, we talked about the economy this morning and how well it is doing. I think one of our tasks here this afternoon has to be, how do we market this? How do we get more Americans to understand that this didn't happen by accident, that this was a result of policies? We have, we now have a very strong visible evidence comparing, Obama versus Trump. In fact, I'm working on with my friends at FreedomWorks. I don't know if Adam's in here, but we're doing a little booklet called Obamonomics versus Trumponomics, and the evidence is so clear that you had a point of inflection when Trump came into office. I showed some of those charts today, and it's interesting because there was someone here who came up to me after this and said, "What about CNN? They're saying that the growth rate's no higher, under Trump than it was under Obama." And CNN's very good at torturing the data till it confesses. And so what happened? The big story under Obama was the first 3 or 4 years were a catastrophe. We ended the recession, but there was no real recovery, Bill. It was like the weakest recovery we had from a recession. And you remember they spent $830 billion. And one of the lessons, this is important. We let the left write the history books, right? They're writing the history books. They're rewriting the history books about Reagan. Now, did you all know that? Oh, he was not a successful president, and all he did was run up big deficits and so on. Now they're rewriting the history of Obama. Not that he was a failed president when it came to the economy, which he was, but he's the Messiah who resurrected our economy and got us out of the Great Recession. That's just a false narrative. We spent $830 billion, and by their own numbers, by Obama's administration's own numbers, the economy performed worse in the next 3 years than if we had done nothing. if we had spent nothing. So all we got out of that was $830 billion of spending. My point is that the Keynesian economic model has been proven wrong every single time it's been tried. Every time you try to stimulate the economy with spending, right, Mark, it doesn't work. And it was you said this earlier today, but it is, I mean, I think all economics comes down to that one Milton Friedman line, that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And everyone thinks that somehow if the government spends money, that somehow it's going to stimulate the economy. So I think we need to do a better job, Bill, because look, this is the most important, this is a critically important election. As I said earlier, we have a conflict of visions right now between the two parties. And one mistake we make, I think, is to hold out like Sanders as this crazy man, which I mean, everyone agrees that Bernie Sanders is wackadoodle-doo, but they all are, right? Every single one of them on the stage is crazy. I mean, Biden's crazy. I mean, they all want to shut down American oil and gas. They all want higher taxes on the rich. They all want, massive increases in government spending. They all want a Green New Deal. So we shouldn't just poke fun at Bernie Sanders. I think it's the whole field. As I said earlier, I call them the killer bees. Buttigieg, Bernie, Bloomberg, and Biden. And so I think that's a real important thing, because who knows if they'll probably try to they'll steal the nomination from Bernie Sanders, right? I mean, they do steal. And so I think that's a critically important thing. We have to defend the tax cut. Unfortunately, Bill, the polls are showing that the left is very disciplined. They say the same thing over and over and over again, right? Colin, you know that. I mean, they just have their talking points, and all they do is, so if you ask the American people, what do you think about the tax cut? Guess what they say? Oh, that was just a big tax cut for rich people and big corporations, because the media and the left says it over and over again. So we need to be, I think, better equipped to fight this, because it's not just about Trump. It's about our economic ideas. And if we can get 4 more years of this, we'll have a real validation. I am worried, frankly, last thing I'll say is, I am worried about the virus. I do want to hear from people, about what they think about this, because there is a danger, and I'll just stop with this, that to me, the problem is not the virus itself, it's the reaction to the virus. And what you're getting is a gridlock of the chain, the supply chain. And I talked to several of you at lunch who are in business, said, boom, it's just come to a halting, that orders just have stopped. And that's a real danger, because that could cause a recession. And so I'll stop there.
Mark?
Yeah, so I'll follow up on the coronavirus situation in the stock market. I mean, there's an old saying on Wall Street exaggerates everything, and on the upside and the downside. And we had, kind of a beautiful economy we had very few corrections in the stock market. We had not just low inflation, but low interest rates, historically low interest rates, and they're getting even lower.
The 30-year is what, 1.6?
Yeah, it's under 2%. I mean, it's at historic lows, and so interest rates are really an important factor. I would be really worried if interest rates were rising, because that's where the danger comes with the stock market collapse, and that's when you can get 50% declines, which we've had in the last 20 years. We've had 2 periods where stocks really tanked. And if that happens, if the economy, I have this statistic that I'm working with the government now called gross output, which includes the supply chain. And I will not be surprised if it's negative, the supply chain. I mean, I just went into Office Depot to buy a new computer, and they didn't have all the parts to the computer. And they said, why don't you just wait? And that's the supply chain, and it is drying up, and that is going to have a major factor in the economy. So politically, the big fear is that whoever you want to blame, you don't want to go into an election with a threat of recession or an actual recession. You don't want to go into a presidential election with the stock market down 50%. That can elect a Bernie Sanders. Because, you all say Bernie Sanders is crazy and stuff like that. But a lot of people thought Donald Trump was crazy, that Donald Trump was an outlier. And he got elected as an outlier. So why couldn't Bernie Sanders get elected as an outlier? And if the economy tanks, no matter who to blame, that's a real danger. And we have Alan Lichtman, who is the professor of political science at American University. He's written a book called The Keys to the White House. He has the best, the most accurate prediction. He has called correctly every presidential election from Reagan to Trump. And that's pretty impressive considering a couple of really close calls. And he says right now it's too close to call. So I don't think we should sit on our laurels thinking Trump is going, I mean, you suggested maybe 40 states are going to go for Trump. Well, that would be nice, but, and the election odds, and that's what you have to look at, bettingodds.com that John Stossel does. You should all check that. That's updated every hour. And right now, in the Democratic convention, it has Bernie Sanders ahead by 50% that he will win the Democratic nomination. Second is Biden. Biden has just surpassed Mike Bloomberg. Bloomberg has been falling. But on the presidential election side, they do have Trump winning, 50% chance of winning, Bernie Sanders 20% chance of winning. They also show that the Republicans will keep the Senate. However, they will continue to lose the House, and the Democrats will control the House. So that could mean another 4 years or 8 years of gridlock in terms of legislation. One of my concerns, even if Trump does get reelected, is to what extent is he really going to drain the swamp? Now, drain the swamp is something we talk about a lot, but unless you make fundamental changes in government, you're never going to, the swamp, you're going to be swimming in the swamp. And there are some examples of this. The FTC is still going after online universities. The IRS is still harassing people all the time. The EPA has been pulled back a little bit, but they're still there, and so a new president coming in can wreak havoc. The Department of Education, I don't know anybody who knows any good that the Department of Education has ever done. And my wife works with education people all the time, and money is flowing into the education system. They don't know what to do with the money. But it's not going to teachers, and it's not going to students. It's going to this massive superstructure administration with their buildings and that's the people that are hiring. So you can see why people are frustrated with the education system, because nothing is really being done. You got a Secretary of Education that's in favor of school choice and so forth, and some progress is being made. But why is the Department of Education still around? It doesn't do any good. And people talk and talk about it, but if you really want to drain the swamp, why don't we have that as an action? Finally, somebody have the guts to say, hey, just return the money to the states and to the local people. Let them decide what to do with education, because the federal side does nothing positive about education. Let's see, the only other thing I wanted to say was on the trade policy. I hope Steve is right. I know you've changed your views on Trump's trade policy, and he has had some successes. But his rhetoric is protectionist, and it's very dangerous. And if the United States, which has been in the forefront of free trade, if we move to a protectionist stance when all is said and done, then that's a step backwards. I mean, Trump's done a lot of good things, but if we end up with protectionist measures when all is said and done, that's a danger.
So can I just clarify one thing?
Yeah.
Because it's important. You know, when I said Trump wins 40 states, that is if the economy stays strong.
Yeah,
you're exactly right. It is. Well, it wasn't a big if 2 weeks ago, but today
Well,
it is a big
now.
if.
Yeah.
But if we go into a worst case scenario,
Well, we've
we
got
go
some
into,
statistics.
pardon?
Is Ralph Reed here? It's too bad. Ralph Reed talked to us a couple days ago, and somebody had looked at the last elections, and something like of the last 18 elections, presidential elections, when the economy was in good shape before the election, 11 out of 11
Yeah.
Yeah,
incumbents
great
won.
statistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when the economy was not in good shape, 7 elections, only one
Yeah.
won.
Yeah,
So all this prognostication is totally, we don't know anything until we know how this is going to play out in the next 90 days. And just maybe, and the virus, as I understand it, it could take months to work its way through as to know what the implication is. So it's not like we're going to know in a second. We've got a virus expert here, but your turn will come.
Good.
John?
I'd like to start. Can I have the clicker, Bill, to go through some
The
slides
clicker,
here? 'Cause,
okay.
I'm going to stand up because I'm not as smart as these guys that can talk sitting down. But if you look at the chart here, there's the gross domestic product of the United States. I think fundamental to the election of President Trump, and particularly, although we never talk about it anymore, is the big tax cut of 2017 really set our economy in motion like most people never experienced or expected. So we go all the way back here to like 2001, or actually 1997. You can see the shaded areas are recessions. So there was the recession, the brief recession after the attack of the World Trade Center in 2001. And then, of course, the financial crisis right there in the middle. But what I'd like to point out about this chart in particular is the consistency of GDP since President Trump has taken office. It's created a stable business environment where everything has begun to thrive. So you can see, look at the erratic patterns in the Bush and Obama administrations. So just as a quick observation of a chart, you can see we're operating in a much more stable environment than the United States has been in arguably for the last 20 years. Now, employment. My business is 401k plans for small companies. So we have over 20,000 small companies as clients throughout the United States. So we're looking really closely at the employment and data that comes from small companies. And you can see the red line there shows the significant employment improvements that have taken place during the Trump administration. But I want to point out, we're getting a confluence here of several different factors that I think all of us, particularly the conservative movement, need to be aware of. As I mentioned, I have this company, 187 employees. We make a lot of investment in technology every year. Were we running the same way 10 years ago as we are today, it would require more than 400 employees to do the work we did 10 years ago.
Wow.
So implementation of technology, all of the shifts that are taking place. So arguably, every small business is in the process of eliminating all kinds of jobs because of technology. So this is really having a big impact on the workforce. It's having a big impact on the economy. And then, of course, it bleeds right into policy and policy direction that we take from the president. Here's the civilian labor force participation rate. Now you can see the convergence there of the green and red line for many, many years, but come the election of President Trump, you get this enormous shift back to working. So currently, there are 7.6 million unfilled jobs in America.
So with the red line,
Could
what
you
are the red
could
lines?
you explain this
What's the
chart? It's
green
not-
and
it's
the
not
red
clear.
line?
Yeah.
Okay, let me make sure I get this
Yeah.
right. So the red line is all Americans, all ages. The green line is prime working age, from, 25 to 54 years of age. That's an amazing change. We've never seen this before in the history of the economy, to see the workforce being transformed so dramatically within such a short length of time. So you can see these policies make a difference. Now, productivity, I think, is the hidden sort of gem within the Trump economic trove here. Productivity, we had lost this battle. The red line is the real output per hour of all people, and then real compensation is the red line. So you can see the convergence of the blue and the red line just in the last few years. Now, as probably everyone knows, productivity, well, maybe you don't. If productivity averages 2.6% per year gains over a 30-year period, we double our standard of living. Okay? So historically in America, over decades and decades, we've had this level of productivity gains all the time. Mark, you had the headline about Ford, right? The changes that Ford made. That's a perfect example. If you were in the session that Mark led earlier, he showed in 1914, the Ford Motor Company paid their workers $5 per day, more than doubling their wage just in a single year. That's because their productivity gains were so substantial.
Yeah.
It allowed everyone in America to move forward. Now, when you hear about the American dream no longer being available to everybody, part of this is this red and green line, red and blue line right here. Because when we lose productivity, we lose the ability to improve our standard of living.
Could we amplify on this? What time period are we looking at here?
It goes all the way back to 1952.
Okay, so it's not 5 year. This is
No,
a
this
5
is
year average.
1952.
So 1952, we had fairly high productivity through the 50s, and then it began dropping in the 70s and 80s. What was that jump up in productivity in the recent decade?
The jump up was the dot-com introduction of the PC, the automation of a lot of work being done that was never done before.
And then it declined through Bush, Obama.
Exactly.
And now it's coming back up.
Yes, exactly right.
Okay, so that's the...
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And there's some debate as to whether those productivity figures really apply today, because how do you measure productivity on the internet and stuff like that? We see the little ball going around and around and around. That's not productive.
Yes, I'm agreeing with Mark here, because some of these measures were based on old economic kind of parameters that need to be updated to today's technology.
So let me just add one thing to that, because it's so important to how economics works. Can you go back to that slide that you just had?
I don't know.
You can't go backwards.
There's no back button on this.
There it is.
No, the next
no, not that one.
That's a
This one right here.
So it's also what's also true. So then the question is, what drives productivity? Okay, so you're right. Productivity drives wages. What drives productivity? What drives productivity? Capital investment, human capital and physical capital. So if you look at a chart of wages and capital as a share of labor, what you see is almost a 92% correlation between those two. Now, why is that important, John? Because you mentioned our 2017 tax cut. What did we do? We lowered the corporate tax rate, and it was all oriented. I mean, this is a really important point for you all to understand, because everybody keeps saying, oh, this was just a big tax cut for corporations and for rich people. No. Every meeting I was in with Trump, it was all about, he'd ask us, how is this going to help middle class wages? And the answer is, the reason you're seeing that bump up in wages, which is very significant, is because we've seen a big infusion of capital investment by businesses and foreigners investing in the United States. So it's just important to have that whole chain. You need
and your
more
blue
capital.
collar workers too. That chart was going
Right.
through the roof.
And by the way, Bill, I will just add one other quick thing, because I know you're not a big fan of Google. Google just announced this week they are increasing their capital investment by $10 billion. One company, $10 billion. So we need more capital investment if we're going to grow.
We'll discuss
But,
later.
but that's a whole other discussion.
Google's a whole other deal. We'll get into
Okay,
that.
go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
But
No, but
Steve,
that
how
was-
would the investment? I'm just curious. If we back up and look at other countries like Japan or Europe or Central, wherever people corporations are investing, is the United States more or less unique now in rising?
We
global
are
investment?
alone, Bill.
That's what I thought.
We are alone in all of this.
Yeah.
Japan has been in a 20-year recession. I have debates with investment people all the time, like, gee, the developing market sector is so far behind. We ought to invest there. Not true. Most of the developing market is sort of laboring under this socialist sort of umbrella that keeps those seemingly emerging economies held in check.
Yeah.
Held in check. Not so in the United States. So
Because they're not getting the capital investment.
They're not getting-
innovation.
Yeah, American exceptionalism is still very real, and in fact, you can see this in stock market performance. There's no other stock index that has done better than the United States over the last 100 years, over the last 50 years, over the last 20 years, over the last 10 years. It's truly amazing. I mean, in my newsletter, we only have U.S. stocks. We don't even use the foreign markets.
Right. So let me move on to the other hidden part of the Trump agenda, which is very difficult to quantify, but you two could certainly do this better than me. The first thing is the deregulation. Most of us this is such an amorphous concept to communicate. And so this is directly from the White House. So I think this contradicts something you said earlier, Steve. But for every cut, there have been 8.5 regulations deleted for every new rule put in place. And he promised 2. So you're right, he did break his promise, and he's eliminating a lot more.
It was 22. He must be enacting more regulations.
Okay, okay, it could be. But very importantly, because you can think about all the businesses out here. My business is the retirement plan business. So on December 20th, the Secure Act was passed. Raise your hand if you know the Secure Act. Okay, very, very few people. The Secure Act is the most important legislation to affect retirement plans in America since 2006. Okay, so it's landmark in terms of the regulatory environment change for retirement plans. And so what the Secure Act allows companies to do is come together into what's called a pooled employer plan. So many companies now can come together, pool their assets, and get much lower costs, have greater access to retirement plans, especially for small companies. Now, none of you heard that except for a few hands. So that happens in industry after industry after industry.
Who made that happen?
President Trump.
Okay, I wanted to make that.
It was pretty
Clear.
bipartisan,
Yeah, it was.
actually.
Yeah, well,
In this particular case, there was like a bipartisan support there. But you can see his efforts cost, the slash regulatory cost by nearly $50 billion, reaching $220 billion once the actions are fully implemented. We're talking billions. That's a lot of money. 16 pieces of deregulation signed by President Trump are expected to increase annual incomes by more than $40 billion. So that works out to be, for the average household, $3,100 per year. So no one can identify the deregulation process because it's so incremental in the system. But when it takes place, it has real power. So you take the tax cut of 2017 and the regulatory diminishment here, you get a really powerful set for the U.S. economy. So here's the major averages. Since 2001, You can see the yellow line is the NASDAQ. This reflects, of course, the investment in technology. The blue, green, and red lines are the S&P 500, the Dow, and the Russell 2000. These are segments of the stock market. So you can see the investment has really gone into the technological revolution that is taking place here. We can't talk about the stock market and the financial markets without talking about the coronavirus. Because this is typically the black swan. Nobody anticipated it. This is from just a few days ago from CNBC and Johns Hopkins. So you can see here are all the confirmed cases. Most are in China. And here's one overlooked element that is beginning to, I think, come through to the markets. The Chinese market was devastated when the coronavirus first was introduced. Fell very, very sharply. In the last week, it's up 8%. Now, why? Why is the Chinese stock market, the Shanghai exchange, up? Well, the Chinese are cheaters. Maybe they're manipulating the market, but I don't think so. I think what's happening, as you can see from the yellow section here, the coronavirus is stabilizing and even beginning to recede.
Yeah.
So what we have here with the coronavirus panic that's underway is a true case study. We can look at where it started in China and see it's run its course in about a month. It's beginning to stabilize and actually come down. So in very few cases, apart from China. This last look, this is just from yesterday's CNBC website. Here are all the cases. There's 78,000 in China. You can see the other major places are Italy at 655, 245 in Iran, Korea and Japan all have a lot of cases. Everywhere else, it's just single or double-digit cases. So this is where the coronavirus is now. So one of my three kind of things was keep calm and stay invested.
Yep.
Keep calm and stay invested.
Yeah,
Because I think we can see the epicenter of the virus was in China, and now it's beginning to recede, and that's a model for the rest of the world. So could there be a recession as a result of the stoppages that have taken place? I think so. One of the things that I don't think many people have talked about, the epicenter of the virus in China itself is in the province where 80% of the generic drugs are manufactured. So, and China has an overwhelming dominance in the generic drug industry. So if there's going to be a shortage somewhere, it might be when you go to CVS or Walgreens for your generic drug, it may not be there. So that's just a quick look.
Okay, thanks, John. Bill Koenig, who's the White House correspondent for World Watch Daily, came up between sessions and said he's been doing a lot of research in the virus. I thought it'd be useful to take a couple minutes. If we get a microphone over here, we're ready to get you guys involved in this conversation. And John, we obviously didn't coordinate because my closing statement was going to be from Winston Churchill, where they had. Have you ever been in the bunker in London? Mm-hmm. You remember the sign? Keep calm, carry on. So, John.
Okay. Sorry. So is this my last time, Bill? All right.
Yeah, Bill, quick.
Thank you, Bill.
A couple minutes.
I've studied this intensely for about the last week and a half, and we'll be adding things to our website. Our website address is watch.org, and across the top there is a category I to I. Just click on that link, and there's a title that says coronavirus. I have, I think, to start with, Dr. Francis Boyle, who President George Bush Sr. appointed to be the author of the Biological Weapons Acts in 1989, which was unanimously passed by Congress, said that this this virus leaked from a biological or bioterror facility in Wuhan Peninsula. And what had happened is, and I'm still working on this, but anyhow, Dr. Boyle first thought that this had been smuggled out of a bioterrorism facility in Winnipeg, Canada. There was about 5 around the world, and basically if Germany, France, United States, United Kingdom, China, Russia have them, then if there's any threats, we have our access to our bio events, and it could become a bio-warfare war. And what Dr. Boyle said is all these facilities should be closed. But nonetheless, the SARS leaked out of this facility. And what I mean is Dr. Boyle doesn't believe it was intentional. But he says they're sloppy in this facility. So right now we're identifying where it actually came from. And he says this is a weaponized bioterror event he calls it a weaponized SARS. The good news is its mortality rate is only about 2.5%. Mm-hmm. SARS was about 9.5%. But the challenge, Dr. Boyle said, is SARS was 60% contagious. This is 80% contagious. So you've seen some drastic decisions by governments. First of all, I have a good friend that's a doctor, and he said one of the best things the Trump administration did was immediately close our borders the best we could. He said, I'm very calm, because he was very familiar with the SARS situation. So that was a really good move. And that's why we don't have a lot of cases in America at this point. But what happens, there was a great article, and we'll have a lot of articles on our website, watch.org, over the next, daily on this, just to really do the best we can to extrapolate the issue. But he said the main thing is they had an event in Singapore. And it was for 100 people, business people that came from all over the world. And they went home to 5 different countries. And all of a sudden it popped up in Indonesia. All of a sudden it popped up in France. All of a sudden it popped up in the UK. So what happened is the French government went into this chalet in the French Alps and quarantined everybody that was in that house. So it's incredibly contagious. That's the greatest challenge to this disease. Also, Pence will now be the point man, which is a very, very good move. But what happened on Thursday, he added a lady that Obama had appointed to handle the HIV/AIDS situation. The reason for that is because this coronavirus is mutating similar to HIV and AIDS. And I'm not a chemist or a doctor, but I thought that was very interesting. So the best news is we have some of the greatest physicians in the world operating on this. Canada is helping. Also, Israel has some doctors that are on this. They call it an enigmatic event because it takes up to 14 days to surface. So people can come in the border, look fine, don't have the temperature, and then all of a sudden it starts coming and then spreading. So the bottom line is, I think what we've seen in America, when you have the Dow drops 12%, the NASDAQ and S&P drop 10%, a lot of that's panic. Yeah. A lot of that's panic. But the great concern, it hasn't even hit our shores yet. And this is one, I'll tell you folks, this is for prayer. We've seen through Steve and these gentlemen here, this is the most incredible economic, the Trump administration, what he has done in all areas of government and economics is phenomenal. It is absolutely incredible what he's accomplished. And there's only one thing, and the Democrats and their media is going to try to weaponize this coronavirus. Yeah. But more than anything else, we have to really intercede through prayer, because this is a serious issue that could get out of control fast. And we had a pretty good taste of it this week through the way the media handled things. And the Democrats attempted to blame the Trump administration for not doing enough quick enough.
Bill, thank you. That's great. That's great. Okay, so I want to open this up to the floor for comments, observations, expertise. Yeah.
If we just take where we are on the coronavirus today, not try to project the future, we know that we're all learning how powerful the supply chain is to China. We're just starting to really see the consequences on this economy. It will probably extend at least 2 more quarters if you just think about the timing. Isn't this something that is going to cause the American public to think about Trump's desire to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. Don't you think it would be helpful to have a Trump policy that really took advantage of everybody's concerns about how dependent we have become on China without even realizing it in terms of the average public?
I think you raise a very good point. I can't tell you how many CEOs I've talked to in the last week or so who are rethinking China as a reliable source. And they should rethink that. I mean, look, first of all, can we all start calling China communist China, because they are a communist nation, right? And they've moved very much towards totalitarianism. So I think that you have a good point. Look, there is great value in the global supply chains. You talked about the productivity improvements. A lot of that is the things that have raised living standards around the world, more than anything else in the last 30, 40, 50 years have been two things: trade and technology. And there's no question about it. It's caused a massive reduction in global poverty rates. But I think you raise a very good point that China may not be the kind of reliable source. I think that's for businesses themselves to think about. But I think everyone is reconsidering whether China is the cheap place to do business.
Let me make another comment here, though, because this is really important. Globalization is going to be with us. You can't stop
That's true.
progress. And globalization is very important. It has lifted poverty out. We talked about doubling the wages of Ford workers. Let me tell you, the Chinese people have seen poverty being reduced dramatically. If you stop that, you're going to have a lot of Chinese who are going to be angry with us, and who knows what that is going to lead to in terms of military and political instability. Yes, it's good that we're opening up now in Vietnam, and other places are becoming good choices, and diversification is really important. But for Trump to get up and say that it would just be great if the iPhone was made in America, you're talking about an iPhone that's going to cost $5,000 to $6,000 a person. You have to have these global supply chains, and that is essential to a dynamic, productive economy. So we don't want to go backwards to the point where we're making everything in America. That is not going to work. Your cost of living is going to go through the roof, and we're going to be hurting a lot of people who are benefiting from globalization.
All right, add just one thing, Pricey, real quick, is that it's one thing to be able to talk conceptually about global supply chains and what these big companies do. It's another thing when you go to Walgreens and you can't get your prescription filled. Then it begins to sort of hit at the very nerve of what we're talking about. The concept is reality. So I think if we just get some hints of that along the way, there's certainly going to be a new awareness of what this means and the vulnerability that we have in the context of this complex global economy.
Yeah, back here? Or where do we have? Over here? Okay. Yeah, Tim.
Bill, I'd love to have your panel respond to a couple things that are near and dear to California but have national implications. The first one being housing. Housing's always a problem here in California. If you try to build right around here, you not only deal with local municipalities, you have the Coastal Commission, all those kind of things. But the thing that's popped up most recently is the whole homeless issue. And you're going to have municipalities and the state getting involved in this. And when you start putting camps or tiny homes next to other things, there's going to be an impact on just the economics of housing. So that's number one. The second one would be federal funding. We had a decision recently that says that it's now a conflict in the courts that the federal government can withhold funds from sanctuary cities and the like. And so California, being a state that loves to be obstinate, we love to do things against the federal government, at some point this is going to start weighing in that we're going to cut off our nose to spite our face by not being able to get federal funds. I'd like you to comment on both of those.
By the way, is Steve Barry here? Because he was telling me about an expert on homelessness in California with the Discovery Institute. He's
Well,
not here.
let me say something about it to start. By the way, can you put up that chart that I have on the states? Because I think, what the most important thing that's going on in America that is not being followed and it's not being reported on enough is very simple, that red state America is kicking the butt out of blue state America, right? I mean, we're seeing, how many of you live in Florida, Tennessee, or Texas in this room? I mean, you are the high-flying states. Keep going. It's toward the end. So, but this is really an amazing thing. People are voting with their feet. Keep going. Against the policies of blue state America. And by the way, I don't say this with any joy. I'm from a blue state. I'm from Illinois. Anybody here from Illinois besides me? I mean, what's happening in Illinois is a total disaster. It breaks my heart to see the craziness. Keep going. And so here it is. There it is. There it is. I mean, look at this. These are the 4 biggest states in the United States. Texas, Florida, California, and New York. And, Texas, by the way, what is the income tax rate in Texas and Florida? Zero. California New Yorkers, how many California New Yorkers in this room? A few of you. So sorry. I mean, it's, California and New York now have 13% tax rates. You don't think that makes a difference? So look at that. Texas and Florida have gained 1 million net people from the rest of the country. These are people, by the way, it's a great thing to ask your liberal friends. If liberalism is such a wonderful thing, why are people leaving liberal states for conservative states, right? They don't have an answer for that. When I did that debate with Paul Krugman at Freedom Fest about 4 or 5 years ago, I showed Krugman this. I said, look, California and New York, Paul Krugman, are doing everything that you want them to do. And Texas and Florida are doing, right to work, low welfare benefits, zero income tax rates. And everybody's moving from California and New York to Texas and Florida. I said, how do you explain that? He said, well, it's because of the weather. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Then I have to confess, I hit him hard below the belt. And usually I don't do that kind of thing. I said, well, that's really interesting, Dr. Krugman. I don't have a Nobel Prize in economics, and I don't teach at MIT and so on. But I know I have a pea-sized brain. But I said, there's something I don't understand. If people are moving, this is all attributable to the weather. Why are people moving from San Diego to Houston? Right? Because nobody moved from San Diego. He had no response to that. So policy matters. Policy matters. For those of you, these blue states are going to either have to change or die. You're from Illinois? Yes. Did you say? There's a huge ballot initiative in Illinois that is going to be monumentally important in November. It's the Pritzker wants to, double the income tax on the richest 1%. And this is going to be a great test whether there's any sanity left in the state of Illinois. Because you know what's going to happen if they pass that? What's going to happen? Okay. There is not going to be a rich person left in Illinois to tax. Right? It's very simple. So on the homeless thing, just one quick point. Okay. This is not a hard problem to solve. It was stopped and it was prevented and it was, it was dealt with by America's Mayor Giuliani 20 years ago. And you just do very sane policies. You don't tolerate it. We believe that people should have homeless shelters and places to live. But the idea, anybody been to San Francisco or Los Angeles lately?
Oh, yeah.
It is disgusting. It is a public health threat to America. You don't even want to go to downtown. These 2 great cities have been destroyed because the left just tolerates this. And the first step you have to take is basically say, no, you can't pee and poop on the street corners. We have to take these measures to not tolerate it in a compassionate and kind way. And they don't do that in California. And by the way, isn't it interesting? Which cities have the worst homeless problems? The liberal cities do.
Okay, next question. We got, who's got the mic? If you got a mic, start talking.
Yeah. All right, I've got a quick question. I'm from that part of Texas where it's growing, and unfortunately, we got Californians coming to Texas, which creates a bigger problem.
You're going to have to build a wall.
Yeah, we'd like and get California to pay for it. But anyway,
touche.
But one of the questions I've got, I want to go back to this coronavirus issue because when you pull up the map, when you show all the different countries. Is the U.S. doing anything to help these countries?
Could we see that map?
Is there a way to pull that up? And the reason I ask this question is because we do a lot of mission work in Africa. And I'm concerned that is there anything being done to help that country? Because if that country has any problem at all.
You mean continent?
Yeah, continent, I'm sorry. We do a lot of work in Ethiopia. If anything happens to that part of the country, and we got some serious issues, is the U.S. doing anything to help those countries?
Well,
not to my knowledge.
Well, the market's helping those countries. I mean, Steve and I were talking about a chart that somebody sent me from one of the consultants, and D.C. And it's a credible firm, but we couldn't figure out the source of the statistics. And I don't have the up on the chart. But if you look at this, we've got a blue line that goes from 1987 to 2019, and you can see it goes up.
What is that?
And the blue line is the percentage of the world in middle class. And it goes from 21% in middle class in 2000 or 1987 to 47% today. Now, those numbers seem a little exaggerated to me, but the trend is there, and it's happened because globalization with the market economy, even if it's a mixed economy, has done people a lot of good. And I think more market solutions in Africa would be my way to go. And the declining line would be the percentage people living in extreme poverty in 1987 going down, and it drops from 36% to 8%. So in this backdrop of all this Sturm und Drang and how terrible the United States is, things like that, the world's getting richer. And that's a good thing. It's happening because of the market. So we're in this very difficult time, I think, where it's obvious that there have been market excesses, but also the market's made a lot of people richer. Mark?
Yeah, and not only that, but those critics who say the middle class has been decimated, Bernie Sanders and others say that, that's because people in the middle class are relatively stable, the percentage, but that's because they're moving up from the middle class to the upper middle class. And that's often ignored in those statistics. Am I not correct on that, John?
You're right. If you just look at the map for a second, the United States represents 54% of global GDP. Look how little we are compared to the rest of the world. 54% of global GDP. So we are the economic engine of the rest of the world. So that chart that you have there, Bill, that shows the economic progress all around the world, the epicenter of that progress is right here. It's right here in this economic engine that is in peril in this next election. It's in peril with an emerging generation that doesn't have a proper view of socialism. But the rest of the world is benefiting because of the wonderful productivity of the United States.
And the mistake we made with China is that we thought by bringing them into the world economy and making them wealthier, they would become more democratic. Instead, they become more autocratic and communist. And my God, what a place with all the surveillance.
Can I suggest something for the rest of the time we have? Because this is an action-oriented group.
Yeah.
And, I would love, I'm working on the campaign, for 2020. Donald Trump is going to win re-election. And what I'd love is ideas from people. Mark mentioned one, shut down the Department of Education. What should the second term agenda be for Trump on the economy? What are things that we need to do?
Great.
Because I'd love ideas. I mean, I think it would be, we could get that to the Trump,
Well, we need to wring our
right
hands a bit about the virus, though, because it is of concern, and we can do that.
Yeah.
It's early.
We want to look past it, but
exactly.
But we still got to deal with it, though. Who has a microphone? Go ahead.
I just
Stand
wanted
up.
to comment on the question about China. I attended a hearing last week on Thursday, and one of the primary things that we heard testimony about was that China is in Africa right now and has loaned $3 billion to Ethiopia just in the last few weeks. And they are doing something that they're calling legal aid, but that the Department of Defense is calling legal harmonization. They're trying to redesign the laws of all of these countries in Africa to match up with the needs of China. They're actively competing with our government in Africa. Now, I think the virus has probably slowed things down a little bit, but that is one of their priorities right now.
Yeah, Belt and Road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let me just comment on that. The U.S. State Department after World War II went into Africa, country after country, great period of decolonization, of these African countries, and basically did a carbon copy of the U.S. Constitution. Not a bad thing to do, not at all. But these were not democratically oriented states to begin with. They didn't have the fundamental Judeo-Christian ethic that we have in the United States, where this grand experiment has turned out so powerfully. So they're ill-prepared to do this. I think China's efforts there will probably be the same futile effort that the U.S. did as time goes by, because they don't really understand the underlying cultural underpinnings that cause great success to take place.
So could we?
difference is they're using Chinese workers and building Chinese cities in Africa. They're not using African workers.
Well, yeah, and they're lending the money to pay themselves to pay their own workers. I mean, it's a great scam. I think Steve has a point, though. It's now about 2:30. We've got a half an hour left. I do think it'd be a good idea.
Let's do it.
See
I mean, I want to hear what people have.
We couldn't come up with what people think we ought to be doing now. Let's look beyond the virus. Let's assume it's going to have some damage, but we're all going to be fine. But then we got to build a country.
My question on that, I'm back here. Yeah. One, Steve, you said earlier calling on the Fed to reduce interest rates immediately to help in the crisis that we have.
By the way, did you see that exactly 30 minutes after I said that this morning, guess what the president said? I think he had a microphone on this, but anyway, sorry.
Good. So I think that, I mean,
Fed said.
But he always wants to get it.
As far as
Steve, if you were in the social media session yesterday, you'd know he heard it all.
So as far as an action point, I think that maybe is something we put on the list that we need to encourage that effort to reduce the interest rates. Also, what do you think is the impact? We're looking at the virus negatively right now, what it's doing to our markets, but from a standpoint of this has got to give the president incredible leverage in the effort to cut the trade deal with China. You said their economy is going to probably have negative growth this year. So what can the president do? What would your thoughts be about helping encourage the president to use this as an opportunity to get phase 2 of the trade talks with China, and while they're down?
I think it's a great point. I haven't actually given a lot of thought to it because we just got phase 1 done, which was a good deal. I mean, it was a very productive thing. China, the most important thing to me is the theft of our intellectual property by China. I mean, and it's rampant and it's gone unpunished, for 30 years. And it's a hard thing to enforce, but what we produce as Americans is intellectual property, inventions and technology and patents and copyrights. I have a friend who is the Washington director of Apple. And he said to me over lunch recently, Steve, do you know how many Apple stores there are in China right now? And I didn't know. He said there's 150. And he said, do you know how many of those are actually owned by Apple? 6. So literally what they do in China is they just they take an Apple, insignia, put it, the sign, and put it on the door and say we're Apple. It's like if you and I said let's start a McDonald's, we'll just put up the golden arches. I mean, you can't do that. Yeah, that's happening over and over again. And so I would like to see much more strict enforcement of our intellectual. Look, the theft is estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and that's a big problem. Yes.
I think you must have read The Art of the Deal to figure that out. Yeah.
Okay. Next point. Yeah. Yes, right here.
We have one back here.
We've already got the mic. Okay.
What's that?
Hey, good afternoon. Christopher Harris, Unhyphenated America. Wanted to ask about your view on how to increase minority engagement, especially from an economic standpoint. I mean, a lot of people want to engage us from things like selling weed, and all those things. But it's like, how about just increasing entrepreneurship? Because as people become small business owners, they're a lot more likely to lean towards conservative, want lower taxes. I saw you had one of the stats up there about the labor force participation rate, but also you had something about the unemployment rate, rather specifically for blacks. What are we going to end up doing to push these stats out there so that more people are aware of that? Because in the black community and other minorities, they don't know that there's actually this improvement in the quality of life because they're not hearing it and they're not seeing it.
What do you think would be the single most important policy change that we could make today? If you were Grand Poobah and you could make any policy change to help low-income minorities, blacks and Hispanics, what do you think would be the most important thing we could do?
In the lock that the public schools or the school.
Amen.
Yeah, schools.
Amen.
But yeah, get rid of the teachers' unions.
Amen. You are so with it. By the way,
you're on a roll. Keep going.
I am 100% with you on that. This is the single biggest civil rights issue of our time, right? And Donald Trump is 100% right about this. He talked in the State of the Union about giving 1 million black and Hispanic low-income children an escape route from the deplorable public schools in the inner cities. And we should all rally behind that. This is one of the most important initiatives in our country. I'm from Chicago area, and I live in Washington, D.C. Our public schools are awful. None of us would ever send our kids to these schools. And this is such a great initiative by Trump. And I think that's I really do. I think that's the single most important thing we can do. We're cheating America's youth out of a good, high caliber education.
I would add one thing to that real quick, is that the opportunity zones that the Trump administration has put in place,
yeah, those are great.
Working in conjunction with states, is identifying an opportunity zone is where there's like tax relief for a certain area, and they're all targeted to minorities that have been kind of disenfranchised in the past, but now they're given a great opportunity. So 80% of those opportunity zones go right to the very issue that you're talking about, and nobody talks about it.
Well, so now's the time.
I want to change the subject a bit, because I think we can put education on there. We all agree, but that's pretty long term. Short term, we've got we haven't talked about the $23 trillion deficit, and we haven't talked about the $1 trillion annual deficit.
Well,
I don't think that we're going to be. I used to be doing finance, and this spreadsheet doesn't work. I mean, you go out to the horizon and you drop off and you die.
I'd like to comment on that, because it is an issue where this is one area that Trump doesn't talk about. Didn't even mention it in the State of the Union address. And it is a campaign promise that he would reduce the national debt. And that obviously hasn't happened. And one of the reasons is interest rates are so stinking low that nobody cares.
Right.
And that's essentially what is going on there. But it is creating artificial bubbles in real estate, and this low interest rate, easy money policy that the Fed has. You have an activist fiscal policy and an activist monetary policy together. The only reason it hasn't created inflation in the United States is we export our inflation. The dollar is a world currency. But it is creating bubbles, and we saw that in the stock market. It didn't take much for the stock market to have that dramatic sell-off. And it can happen in real estate. It can happen in other sectors of the economy. So there's, again, no free lunch here. And it is something the president has made some efforts. He has said, remember he said the 5% cut across the board for every budgeted item. It was very briefly mentioned. Larry Kudlow is concerned about this issue as well. But I just don't think it's going to get any traction until interest rates start going back up. And then you're going to see how much we spend on interest on the debt, and that's going to alarm people. So it's kicking the can down the road.
We can't pay for anything else if we pay for that.
Look,
Steve's written a couple of columns on this. Could I give him the floor?
Well, look, just one quick
about how you think we can grow our way out of this.
Well, no, I think that you have to have economic growth to solve the problem of debt. I mean, if you don't get, if you don't get 3% growth, you're just not. You could cut. You're not going to make progress. But here's an important point I want everybody to kind of get in your mind, because you all talk to people around the country. It is deficit spending. Say it's not a deficit. It's deficit spending. Why is that important? It's a spending problem, right? It is not a revenue problem. In 2019, with our tax cut, the United States government collected more tax revenues adjusted for inflation than any other single year in history. Now, the only thing why this is important, Bill, is if we talk about deficits and debt, what does the left say? Raise taxes, raise taxes, raise taxes. It's not a revenue problem. It's an overspending problem. That's the only thing. I just want to get people focused on how do we get spending down.
I want to. There's something that's really important. Last September, the president signed this budget-busting bill with the Democrats and Republicans. They all signed this thing. The president signed it, the budget for 2020. And in September, you had the repo market suddenly shoot up 10%. It was a very short-term thing, but the Fed had to intervene and buy $75 billion worth of Treasury securities. They had to cut rates, and they solved the problem short-term. But I'm telling you, when the government overspends with this deficit spending through these budget deals, and you bust the budget like that, the Treasury has to run out and borrow money like crazy, and it can destabilize. You can create a monetary crisis as a result of this. So I'm telling you that this is the last one we saw in September. We could see it again. Got to be careful.
I want to take some more questions. Keep your questions aimed towards a line of action for some of the things that we'd like to offer. Art, where's the mic? How many mics do we have? We seem to be. Are we passing one around?
Just one?
Who has the mic? All right.
Hey, thank you so much. Great information. Todd Coconato. Just have a question when it comes to, so we're talking about coronavirus, and I've worked on the boards of some companies over the years from a supply chain standpoint, from sourcing. With China, I just get nervous because there's so much reliance on them. If we diversified, could we leverage, say, the new NAFTA negotiation, bilateral trade deals with, say, UK, and can we do more of that in the upcoming administration? Yeah.
It's a great point. Trump, I think quite correctly, I don't know if you agree with this, Mark, but Trump has moved away from multilateral trade deals to bilaterals.
Yeah.
And I'm fully in favor of that. People have different decisions about that. But number one on our list, Bill, let's pass yesterday a free trade deal between the United States and now free Great Britain that has been liberated from the Europeans, right? I mean, so we should do that right away. And India, Trump had a great trip out there, so we ought to do that because we need to isolate China. And the more we get these free trade deals with these other countries, the more it isolates China's the better.
And the one other thing, action to take, is we need a second round of tax cuts. We didn't get a capital gains tax cut. That needs to be put into place. And, there are probably some other taxes that would be beneficial. It would be great if the president said, listen, if you reelect me, we're going to have a second round of tax cuts. That might be a positive story.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here in California, we are being inundated with illegal aliens with driver's licenses. So you asked us what we would like the president to address. Voter ID.
Okay. Yep.
Abortion. And just today we learned that the ERA is growing and alive. I wasn't aware of that.
Yes.
And I'd also like him to address term limits.
Yep.
Those are the things.
I like them all.
Okay, yes. Richard, or whoever's...
Right up there.
I got it.
Richard first and then Ty. We'll move it around the room.
Okay, Mark, you said that it was a problem talking about the deficit when the interest rates are so low. We shouldn't talk about it just in terms of the deficit. It's literally stealing. Because when we spend a dollar that we don't have and it goes into national debt, we're literally charging it to our children and grandchildren and beyond. And if we talk about it in moral terms, we can get the attention even of the liberals.
I like that. By the way, I forgot to mention something on the debt that I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal on this about a month and a half ago, and it's more of a good idea today than even when I wrote about it. Mark's right. We have the lowest interest rates in 60 years. We've got, the 30-year Treasury now is at like 1.7. We ought to be issuing 50-year bonds. We ought to be when we borrow, we should shift it out so we can borrow at these lower, so we can finance the debt. It's like refinancing a mortgage, right? And the United States government immediately should start. I'd like because you're in that market. Wouldn't that make sense to start stretching out?
It does.
Because then we're less vulnerable, as Mark said, if interest rates start to rise, if we've locked in these low rates.
The only downside is there's no spending discipline.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, we can manipulate that, but if we don't stop the spending,
except interest on the debt is a huge.
There's a great quote that everybody should write down from Ben Franklin. No revenue is sufficient without economy. No revenue is sufficient without economy. You have to have something in place to economize. That's what economics is all about, economizing. And until you put limits on spending, then you have a problem, and you're not draining the swamp, you're swimming in it. So we really need to do something in terms of some type of discipline And but it's difficult when interest rates are so low. There's other problems in the world. It's just not going to happen.
The conservatives are no fun. We want to economize and discipline ourselves. Ty?
Yeah, the simple question was, there's about 19 or 20 trillion dollars of negative yielding debt in the world. I'm in the real estate business. We have several hundred tenants and several hundred employees. Thinking about refinancing student loans, thinking about refinancing home mortgages. So if you did a mortgage last year at 4%, this year at 2% makes a lot of sense. I think you could go on the offense on some of refinancing debt. Number one. Number two, you could at least spin that. That's much more responsible than forgiving debt altogether with student loan debt, for example, or other debt. And lastly, it seems like, I want to just leave one last line, was in San Diego, we have a lot of military pilots, and they say runway. And my feeling, the runway is the November of next year elections. I have not heard the three scenarios that might be if you're a business person, and you really, I respect you, gentlemen, but you really don't know what's going to happen with this global supply chain. Yeah. Nobody knows, and we can't know. So we would be wise to consider at least three scenarios where we don't know, when you have major corporations that completely pulling their forecast. They don't know. Microsoft, Apple, right. Nestle. I mean, just go down the list. They do not know. The global Royal Dutch Shell pulling their forecast. They don't know what's going to be. So if you, in that scenario, you'd be wise to consider three alternatives, as in Bloomberg is the nominee. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm on the middle, I might trust him rather than Bernie. All I'm saying is that I think that you would be wise to consider risk-adjusted alternatives because you don't know what's going to happen.
Good point.
Too early.
Thanks. Good point, Ty. Yeah, who's got the mic? Okay, time to get up. Go. We have 15 minutes left to boil this down to just our best ideas. Okay. Lou, you want to stand up? Lou, why don't you stand up so we can... we really want to hear you. Okay.
Yeah, Lou.
Give that man the mic.
Tax Reform 2.0.
Yeah.
We want to put killing the death tax at the top of the list. But as we move from here to Election Day, there are all kinds of good things that the President has spoken of as results of Tax Reform 1.0. And I'd like your ideas as to the three top things we should be emphasizing that would be most persuasive to most people that flow from the tax reform that has been achieved to date. Each of you give us your...
Well, I've already told you I'd like to see the capital gains tax go back down to 15%. That would be my number one recommendation.
John, what's your...
I would just comment, the big tax cut is just a perfect example of igniting this economy and moving it forward. The fiscal changes are most important in how we structure and move forward, and the tax cut is the most powerful thing. Monetary policy, just as, the stock market was down 1,100 points at its lowest point just yesterday. And then the Fed said, we're going to supply liquidity. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden
when did it announce that?
At about 3:30.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was right before the market.
At 3:30, and then the market gained 650 points to close down only 300 points. And the NASDAQ was barely positive. So those are powerful tools in the financial markets. So that has to be reinforced over and over again. And we shouldn't forget how powerful that is.
Art?
Yeah. Simple question. Man, I agree with you. 50-year bonds right now, lock it up. However, do any of you really think we can solve the national debt when something like 80% of it, of the spending, is in the entitlement arena? Can they ever solve that problem?
Yes, they can, Art. It's a simple thing.
It
is that it's simple. The life expectancy now in the United States
simple but hard.
It is. It's simple but hard. You just have to work longer. You know, and that's. You see, I'm not running. That's why. You see, in 1933, when Social Security was put in place, 35, men received a benefit at age 65. You know what the average life expectancy was in 1935 for the average male? 55 years of age. So it was for only those really old guys that made it to 65 that were going to get anything. So the whole system has to be recalibrated to where our life really is.
So I have
Once we do that,
I told
we
my
can make progress.
But Trump has shown no appetite for entitlement reform at all.
I will tell you, I tell my students at Chapman University when I teach this, we take a global approach and look at Sweden. You'd think, why would Sweden do this? But they privatized their Social Security system and they adopted school choice. Those are two factors that we would like to see in the United States, because the unfunded liability problem of Social Security is a major disaster. You know, at some point it's going to blow up on us. And if Swedish, you know, and I asked my students, I said, so who's smarter, Americans or the Swedes? And they were dead silent, and I said, it's pretty obvious the Swedes are smarter than Americans.
Okay.
They
didn't want to hear that.
By the way, if you take $10 a day, think about this.
All right,
if every single young American at the age of 23 saved $10 a day, and did that from age 23 to age 66, they would have $1 million if they put that in the stock market.
Yeah.
My argument is Social Security benefits are not too high, they're too low. The biggest ripoff to young people, the worst investment they're going to make in their lives is Social Security. Right. If we move towards a Social Security system like you're talking about, Mark, we would have, and by the way, this gentleman who was talking about, I don't know if he's still back there, the African-American gentleman, the single best thing you could do for young blacks is to allow them to own a piece of the rock. And one of my big themes, and I'd love to just have people comment on this, I think the next big idea for our movement is worker capitalism. Worker capitalism. We have to have every single worker in America invested in businesses and owning a piece of the rock. Today, it's kind of a tragedy. Only 55 to 60% of American workers own stock.
Right.
We should have a system where every American owns stock. And by the way, that's the best counterpart to this left-wing socialist argument that only the rich benefit from capitalism. We want every single
the
American
democratic
own
capitalism idea that I was talking
You with me on that? Every single American should own stock and benefit from the economy. You do that through Social Security privatization, and I had a piece the other day that Larry Kudlow was looking at. Why not allow every American to take $5,000 to $10,000, write it off their taxes if they put it into a savings account, an index fund where they own stock? By the way, this would be great for your business, right? You'd have tens of millions more people invested in the market, and it would be a great thing. And then every time the stock market goes up, everyone benefits.
And the problem we have politically is only the bottom 50% by income only owns 1% of the wealth.
But that's because they don't own any stock.
I know that.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you, you're going to solve that problem.
Yay, all right.
Okay.
All right. So
we got to change that number.
All right, good.
Write it down. We got to get that bottom 50% owning some stock.
There you go.
All right, you asked earlier.
Good.
Oh, did you get your?
No, I didn't get it. You asked earlier about campaigning and all these things. And the gentleman back here brought up blacks and all this, and you brought up education. If memory serves me right, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter gave us the EPA, and he gave us the Department of Education. And I believe Ronald Reagan went in the first term with a pledge to abolish those organizations.
He did.
And so one of the things that I think would be fabulous is you alluded to it earlier. Campaign to abolish the Department of Education and give vouchers and choice to all Americans across.
I love it.
This sells in the black community all day long.
I love it.
And getting rid, and I had a conversation with you earlier about property rights. People's property rights are being stolen by the Corps of Engineers and the Endangered Species Act.
Yes.
So those are great
I love those
campaign slogans to get out and restore your property rights.
Okay, we've gone from 3 action items to 30. I think it's
that's
a good
okay.
number.
Good.
Preston, you want to get something in quickly, and then we've got.
It's very quick. So that we saw a couple of graphics up there that looked very consoling. Everything's been contained to China, and the the cases have just kind of
that.
tapered off. Like the problem's been contained. And so we're in the middle of the winter, and we haven't really got a problem with mosquitoes. And I'm just wondering, is there any danger that this virus will be spread by, insects like mosquitoes? And if so, what might that, I just thought I'd raise that question.
Too early to tell.
Bill, you know? Do we have a mosquito-borne virus, or is it something else? No?
No, it's respiratory.
Okay. Sense is no.
It's a respiratory.
Yeah, back over here.
Right. Okay. It's really great that we have a resolve to eliminate deficit spending. We had some great talk here about tax cuts. But what I don't hear discussed, which we're avoiding and I think needs to be discussed, is the structural reform of our system of government, which precipitates deficit spending on a regular basis. Graham-Rudman, I used to work for Senator Phil Graham. Graham-Rudman was a great step forward. It was then dissipated.
It was.
I think that needs to be a part of our discussion because the status quo is, with our existing machinery system, we will have continued deficit spending, continued increase in debt, unless we have some kind of structural reform. And I'd like that to become a part of our discussion as fiscal conservatives because I think that's going to be critical. Otherwise, we know what the end result's going to be.
You're so right about that. And by the way, we had spending caps. We had sequestration and spending caps, and guess who killed them? The Republicans did. Republicans killed the spending caps and the sequestration process, which was one of the most effective measures of cutting spending. But I remember when in 1985, 86, when Phil Graham, I was working at Heritage back then, my first round, and it was very successful. You put a cap on spending, and if they exceeded the cap, you just do an across-the-board cut. So, Bill, that would be a great one, too.
Okay.
I'm so glad you brought this up.
Real quick.
But neither party wants to do it.
Okay.
I mean, I hate to disabuse you. Does anybody in this room think Republicans in Congress want to cut spending? None of them
Raise
do.
your hands if you
None
believe
of
that.
them do.
No. Go ahead.
They have a great second.
Well,
Stand up.
Rand Paul and Mike Lee. There's a few.
Yeah, there are about 5 of them.
Stand up. We're going to.
Not one of you have mentioned what I perceive to be a bubbling volcano, Iran.
That's.
Is that a problem?
I'm not a foreign policy.
They're the number one or number 2 exporter of oil, so yeah, that's a major issue. Number 2.
That'll be.
Yeah, put those two together.
So real quick, we've got a couple minutes left. We've got 3 action items. Wait, you want to get one in? Can you get this?
Yeah, I just attended a couple of weeks ago an economic war room filming. It's Kevin Freeman, and we talked about the threat of China. So I'm going to get back to China just a little bit. President Trump, during his during his State of the Union address, said that we are now going to have a space force. Okay, and so. China, basically through economic warfare, wants to control space by 2045. I just want to know if President Trump is going to, or if Congress is going to have the political will. It's more of a question than an agenda item. But China wants to control the space corridor for energy, for water, and for communication, 5G network secure communication. Is the Trump administration being handcuffed by the lack of political will by Congress to actually have that initiative to where the United States will have that technology?
We got to keep this on money short term right now.
Okay.
It's a big issue.
It's huge.
What China's ambition? It's a huge issue. I'm not sure we can address it right now. I want to get our guys to give us their best ideas, but that's for a future conversation. It's real.
Well, I think the long-term idea of the balanced budget amendment, I don't know where that stands. Maybe it's like the ERA is never going to pass, which probably...
We're 6 states away from the 34 necessary to trigger a convention of the states.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that your balanced budget?
Yeah, because that's with the tax limitation. That's part of the balanced budget, right?
You have to have the right design of that amendment.
Yeah.
So
yes, that's definitely my. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think we're, John?
Again, to steal your keep calm theme here.
Well, it's not mine. It's
well,
Winston Churchill's,
but
I'll associate myself with that.
You're renting it. You rented it first.
Yeah.
But when you look at the futures, they're all very positive for Monday's open.
Really?
And so, that
expecting the Fed to cut rates, right?
Well, because they did a little liquidity language. Who said the rhetoric Was it you, Steve, that talked about that?
I use that's my.
Oh, was that you
Yeah,
again?
right.
Yeah. So, but the markets seem to be indicating a recovery. Now, I think that's important because I think the markets are obviously very sensitive. We had a 13% drop in the markets within a 6-day period from record highs, and now we're beginning to see a little recovery. I think the keep calm and stay invested is my one point.
So what was the question again?
I forgot.
Your number one.
If you were Donald and you control Congress, what's the one thing you would do?
Gosh.
But you can give us three. What that?
I'm going to throw one more out there that we didn't talk about. Somebody mentioned it, but I think it's a really important one to middle-class Americans. And it is this. The single greatest financial scam in America today, by far, is how much colleges and universities are charging our parents and families. It is completely outrageous. Every school in America, every college and university should cut their tuition in half. They could easily do that and provide a high-quality education. And so I think that should be, I'd like to see Donald Trump. The one thing I wish he had said in the State of the Union is to issue a challenge to universities and colleges.
Yeah.
By the way, why are we providing a single penny of money? There's 25 schools that have endowments of over $500 million. Why in the world are we subsidizing them with federal money?
Well,
so we need to, and by the way, the left seems to think that they have the advantage on this. The problem isn't the student loans. And by the way, every time we increase the student loans, what do you think the universities do? They just increase the tuition. Yeah. We have not made universities more affordable. We've made them less affordable. We need to have our universities and colleges accountable for how they spend
Steve,
money.
I will tell you, I mean, I work with the university at Chapman all the time, and the biggest problem is the bureaucracy. It's HR. HR is exploding in administration. So, you know, the swamp has not been drained when it comes to the education. It's all top down. It's all Department of Education. It's an absolute disaster. So you have to have some reform along with that. Just telling, okay, cut your
administrative
fees.
costs have gone from like 20% to 80%.
It's huge. It's just insane.
Last 50 years. We have 0 seconds left on the clock. I think we've covered a lot. We can't solve all this. The idea was to get us all thinking. I think we've done that, and I'm sorry I couldn't get everybody in.
Bill, if we can get these ideas, you know, is somebody going to put it all?
It's all written down. I think.
Okay, so I will get it to Larry Kudlow. I'll say here's what we've come up with at CNP, and this.
Well, let's work with. We've got Reed back here from United in Purpose who's been taking notes, and why don't we get with Reed and boil this down to something we can give to Larry? How's that?
And I'm going to go sign books if anybody wants my copy of Making Modern Economics.
That's the way to solve the deficit. At least Marx.
I hope we can.
Thank you.